Years ago, Shenzhen was a quiet border town with fishing villages, farmland, and almost no economic value. Today, it is the headquarters of Huawei, Tencent, BYD, and DJI, and it produces more than $450 billion in GDP every year. So how does a place go from almost nothing to one of the richest and most productive cities on Earth in a
Oh, I know. If they didn't have nothing, then the rich niggas probably thought, oh, we should just go build there. There's nothing there.
single lifetime? Let's rewind to the late 1970s, when China made a risky decision, picked one unlikely location, and changed the direction of its economy forever. To understand Shenzhen, you first have to understand how risky this idea really was. In the late 1970s, China was still a centrally planned economy. The state set prices, the state controlled factories, private business barely existed, foreign companies stayed out. For decades, China had focused inward, prioritizing political control over economic growth. China was poor, rural incomes were low, industrial output lagged far.
That nigga said inward. It made me think of this video. This nigga said his son was in the spelling bee. They told that nigga to spell inward. That nigga spelled N-I-G-G-A. That nigga spelled nigga. They told that nigga spell inward. That nigga spelled nigga. Man. Can we watch Invisible? Bro, I already told you we can't watch this shit.
Far behind Japan, Europe, and the United States. Per capita GDP sat under $200 a year. Meanwhile, just across the border, Hong Kong had become one of the busiest ports and financial centers in the world. After Mao's death in 1976, China's leadership faced a problem that could no longer be ignored. The country needed growth, jobs, and technology, but the existing system was not producing any of them at the scale required. The question was not whether change was necessary, but how much risk the government was willing to take to achieve it. That turning point came under Deng Xiaoping, who pushed a new direction known as reform and opening up. Instead of changing the entire country at once, Deng proposed something far more cautious and far more dangerous politically. China would experiment with market-driven policies in a limited area first. If it worked,
not being racist, but I can't wait till you learn how to spell, bro. What are you saying? Since I'm... What? Not being racist, since I'm white and Korean. Can somebody translate what the fuck this nigga trying to say, bro? Not being racist, since I'm white and Korean. You pronounce... Since I'm racist, since I'm not not being racist, since I'm white and Korean, you pronounce the word you as the N-word. What? I'm not being racist, but in Korea, people sometimes pronounce the word you in a way that sounds like the N-word. Oh, okay. Okay. Nigga, like, it's just your English, bro. That shit. But you say you Korean, so it would make sense why your shit fucked up. But like, damn, gang.
The model could expand. If it failed, the damage could be contained. This is where Shenzhen enters the picture. In the late 1970s, Shenzhen was not a city in any meaningful sense. It was part of Bao'an County, with a population measured in tens of thousands rather than millions. Its economic output was negligible. What made it interesting was not what it was, but where it sat. Shenzhen lies directly on the border with Hong Kong, which at the time was one of the most important capitalist trading hubs in Asia. On one side of the river was a fast-moving, export-oriented economy plugged into global markets. On the other side was rural southern China, largely cut off from international trade. The contrast could not have been sharper. From Beijing's perspective, this location offered a unique advantage. Shenzhen could act as a controlled interface between two systems. Capital, technology, and management practices from Hong Kong could flow in. while the rest of China observed from a distance. At the same time, Shenzhen's lack of existing industry made it easier to rebuild from scratch without dismantling entrenched systems. In 1980, the central government officially designated Shenzhen as China's first special economic zone. This decision changed everything. The city received authority that no other place in China had at the time. Local officials could approve foreign investment, lease land, set wages, and offer tax incentives that would have been unthinkable elsewhere in the country. This was not a symbolic move. It was a controlled gamble. The central government understood that success would create pressure to expand reforms nationwide. Failure would raise questions about the leadership's direction. For Shenzhen's local officials, the pressure was even more immediate. They were expected to produce growth fast without a proven playbook and under constant scrutiny from Beijing. And there was no guarantee this would work. Other countries had tried special zones and failed. Even within China, skepticism was widespread. Critics argued that market policies would undermine socialism, create inequality, and destabilize society. Shenzhen became the test case that would decide which side was right, and that is where the real transformation begins. At the beginning, growth was not driven by advanced technology or complex finance. It was driven by basic manufacturing. Hong Kong businesses, facing rising labor and land costs at home, began relocating factories just across the border. Shenzhen offered something Hong Kong no longer could: cheap land, a massive labor pool, and a government actively removing obstacles instead of creating them. Factories producing garments, toys, plastics, and simple electronics appeared almost immediately. Many were basic by global standards, but they had one crucial advantage. They could produce goods at a scale and cost that made them competitive in international markets. Exports rose quickly, and with them came foreign currency, infrastructure investment, and reinvestment into even more industrial capacity. What made Shenzhen unusual was not just the inflow of capital, but the speed at which decisions were made. Local officials were judged almost entirely on economic performance. If a factory created jobs and exports, approvals moved quickly. If a project stalled, it was replaced. This created an environment where delay carried real consequences. As a result, construction moved at a pace that shocked even China's own planners. Roads, power stations, housing blocks, and industrial parks were built simultaneously, often before long-term plans were finalized. The city grew first and planned later. That imbalance would cause problems down the line, but in the short term, it allowed Shenzhen to absorb growth without slowing it down. By the mid-1980s, Shenzhen's economy was expanding at double-digit rates year after year. Entire districts that had been farmland only a few years earlier were now filled with factories operating day and night. One early symbol of this pace was the International Trade Center building, completed in just over a year, which became shorthand for what people started calling Shenzhen speed. The phrase reflected more than construction timelines. It described a mindset where hesitation meant falling behind. The labor force behind this growth did not come from Shenzhen itself. It came from across China. Young workers arrived from rural provinces with little more than basic education and a willingness to work long hours. For many, factory jobs in Shenzhen paid several times what they could earn back home. That wage gap alone pulled millions into the city. This phase laid the foundation for everything that followed. Manufacturing created jobs. Jobs attracted people. People justified infrastructure. Infrastructure attracted more investment. The cycle repeated, each time at a larger scale. But this model also...
I'm just thinking, they said that bill was like, what, 450 billion, right? So that mean them niggas that were working for, like, the building shit, them niggas was getting paid probably some crazy shit. Nah, this far as fuck, though, I ain't gonna lie. This is crazy.
had limits. By the early 1990s, Shenzhen faced a new question. If the city remained focused only on low-cost manufacturing, how long could growth continue before wages rose and competitiveness faded? And if factories eventually moved elsewhere, what would replace them? Those questions forced Shenzhen to change direction again. However, that shift did not happen automatically. In the early 1990s, Shenzhen still lacked strong universities, research institutions, and experienced engineers. It did not have a deep pool of scientists or designers. What it did have was something equally important: flexibility. The same policy freedom that allowed factories to appear quickly could now be used to support new types of companies. The city began carving out dedicated high-tech industrial zones, particularly in Nanshan district. These areas offered preferential land access, tax incentives, and regulatory support for firms working in electronics, telecommunications, and software. Instead of focusing only on export volume, Shenzhen began prioritizing companies that controlled design, patents, and intellectual property. One of the earliest examples was Huawei, founded in Shenzhen in 1987. It did not begin as a global player. It started by selling imported telephone switches, then slowly moved into developing its own equipment. Shenzhen's environment mattered here. The city allowed experimentation, tolerated early failures, and provided access to both manufacturing capacity and customers. Over time, Huawei shifted from low-margin assembly into high-value network infrastructure, eventually becoming one of the world's largest telecommunications companies. By the late 1990s, a second wave of companies appeared, driven less by physical goods and more by software and digital platforms. At a time when internet usage in China was still limited, Tencent, founded in 1998, focused on software and digital services rather than physical production. Shenzhen's growing population of young, tech-literate migrants created a natural user base. As infrastructure improved and internet access spread, Tencent expanded rapidly, building platforms that would later shape how hundreds of millions of people communicate and pay for services. Tencent's growth marked a turning point. It showed that Shenzhen was no longer just supporting physical production. It could also support large-scale software ecosystems, data-driven services, and platform-based business models. At the same time, hardware innovation did not disappear. Instead, it became more tightly integrated with design and production. DJI, founded in 2006, grew out of Shenzhen's dense electronics supply network. The company benefited from a city where component suppliers, assembly facilities, and logistics systems operated within close proximity. This reduced development cycles and allowed rapid iteration. Shenzhen also produced firms that connected manufacturing with long-term policy priorities. BYD was founded in 1995 as a battery manufacturer. As Shenzhen began pushing for electric public transport, BYD expanded into electric buses and vehicles. When the city transitioned its entire bus fleet to electric power, BYD became both a supplier and a beneficiary. This company's growth and the city's environmental strategy reinforced each other. What made Shenzhen different from older industrial cities was how closely manufacturing and innovation were linked. Hardware startups could design a product in the morning and source components by the afternoon. The city's dense network of suppliers, particularly around the Huaqiangbei electronics market, reduced the distance between idea and execution. Prototypes did not require months of outsourcing. They could be assembled locally, revised quickly, and scaled without leaving the city. This feedback loop changed how companies operated. Instead of separating research, design, and production across continents, Shenzhen compressed them into a single ecosystem. That speed became a competitive advantage. It allowed firms to respond to market demand faster than competitors in more rigid environments. The government reinforced this shift with direct investment in research and development. Shenzhen began spending a higher share of its GDP on R&D than most Chinese cities. It also relaxed rules to attract skilled workers, offering housing incentives and startup support to engineers and entrepreneurs. Over time, the city developed a labor force that looked very different from its early factory workforce. Assembly line jobs declined as a share of employment, while software, engineering, and services expanded. By the mid-2010s, Shenzhen no longer relied on low-cost manufacturing to drive growth. Technology, finance, and advanced services had taken over as the main engines of the economy. The city's GDP eventually surpassed that of Hong Kong, a symbolic reversal, given that Shenzhen had once existed in Hong Kong's shadow. Shenzhen had proven it could reinvent itself. Today, it stands as one of the clearest symbols of China's economic transformation. In just 4 decades, it moved from the margins of the national economy to its center, becoming one of the richest and most productive cities in the country. Its GDP now rivals that of entire mid-sized nations. Its companies shape global technology markets. Its infrastructure supports a population larger than many countries. But what matters most is not the scale, it is the method. Shenzhen shows what happens when a government accepts risk, concentrates authority, and prioritizes growth above almost everything else. The city did not follow a long-term blueprint from the start. It adjusted constantly. Policies changed. Mistakes were tolerated as long as output increased. This flexibility allowed Shenzhen to grow faster than cities constrained by rigid planning or slow decision-making. After Shenzhen proved that this could work, China began applying the same approach in other regions. New urban areas were planned around industry, logistics, and technology, often starting with limited populations and heavy state investment. So now the real question is this: does Shenzhen prove that cities can be built almost from nothing if the pressure is high enough? Or does it show that this kind of growth only works once under very specific conditions? And if another country tried the same approach today, would it create a new global city? Or would the costs outweigh the gains? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Yeah, I'm watching both of them videos. They just sure ain't gonna lie.